Welcome to the 5th episode of Futurecast, where we talk to founders, leaders, contrarians, and people who are building the future right here from Iceland. And today we have a special guest, Thor, who's been a longtime friend and the founder of Iceland Ocean Cluster, and kind of the first one who had the courage to bring a fish into the Startup Iceland conference and talk about fish and why it's important. Thor, welcome to Futurecast.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you.
You're listening to the Futurecast.
So the first question is, how did this all start? Where did you start? And I remember we met in 2011. So tell me from your perspective, how did you start on this idea and where it is now?
It's actually part of my PhD study was on how entrepreneurs interact and how they expand their network outside of our small island. I was wondering about the mindsets of the entrepreneurs. Was it something that had to do with their background in education or just, as I say, the mindset? What I realized when talking to various entrepreneurs is that it had more to do with the industry itself. So suddenly I realized that the people that came from these natural resource industries, they had more tendencies to keep their network by themselves.
Close, yeah.
So through that I thought to myself, if this is so, if we can open up the network a little bit, can we create value? And that's why we started with the Iceland Ocean Cluster with the mission of basically connecting all parts of the industry.
Yeah.
And we found, of course, so many examples where we could make a difference.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I mean, I've been a fan of the cluster model for a long time and all the work that you do. And tell me a little bit more about, how did you bring the industry, because it's a very traditional, conservative industry. How do you get them to rethink about fish?
I think I'm kind of spoiled, though. I should mention. The fact is we're, of course, in a country where fisheries is the top of the line, sort of. It's world class.
Right.
But still, relatively speaking, there are so many opportunities still out there. And that's basically what we found out. And the main thing for us was just to try somehow to make the matchmaking work. And what I found in the beginning is that there's so many research been done. There's so much research been done, so much all kinds of R&D work, but it hasn't sort of, in many ways, gone down to the industry itself. So we thought there was an opportunity to try to connect better the academics and the industry, and we found examples. But in the beginning, we realized that what we needed to do was to bring out the business plan itself, rather than the research paper. We would do the business plan to show the industry what there might be of value to their industry if they would do more byproduct utilization, etc., etc.
Yeah. Can you give me a more tangible example? So by the way, the audience for Futurecast are mostly people who are technologists and people who are interested about Iceland. And for a lot of those people, they don't realize when we say that Iceland is almost number one in the fisheries industry, and they say, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So give me some examples.
That's a very good example. I think one thing is that we are now the ones in the world that are using more of each fish than any other. We use around 80% of each fish.
This is like across the globe. This
exactly.
is like everybody.
These are the data that we have indicate that many fishing nations throw away nearly half of each fish. And no one is actually talking about it. I'm kind of bothered with the fact that you can have an MSc, which is like a certification of sustainable catch.
Right.
Even though you throw the half away, if you just do the rest sustainably. But I think it's not basically very sustainable.
No.
So that's where we come from. We come from an island that's actually doing that, and we have nearly 90% of our catch as well certified as sustainable catch. So we come from a very sort of high level of trust in the industry and ambition to do better.
Right. I mean, what was fascinating to me, and just a little bit of context, although what I do now has got nothing to do with fish, I started my career in Iceland with a bank that was funding a lot of the seafood industry. So I quickly learned about the sophistication that was within Iceland related to fishing, and that was just fascinating to me. I mean, the amount of science that goes into managing the quotas, the amount of infrastructure investment that has gone into the fishing vessels to make sure the resources managed well, and all the certification, the sustainability. I mean, it was kind of an eye-opener for me to see that, the industry is not as conservative as you would expect it. There's been a lot of investment made to understand how this industry uses the resource. And I think what you've added, which I've found to be fascinating, is that most waste people think is waste. But to build something out of waste that is more valuable than the original product, can you walk me through at least a couple of examples there? I think you have many examples that has happened in Iceland.
I think we've of course seen now in the last 10 to 15 years more been done in this area here in Iceland, meaning that there are pharmaceutical companies, all kinds of medical devices coming out, and we have of course keresis with the fish skin becoming a medical product. We have enzymes from the fish intestines.
Right.
What is so amazing that the guy who started there, he started some 30 years ago studying the enzymes of the fish. Why? Because he felt that the hands of his nephews that were fishermen were softer than they should be after being in such cold weather.
Sure.
And he realized after researching that this was the fact. The enzymes of the fish were actually helping the skin to heal. And so we can do the fish oil, we can do all kinds of other products. The fact is just there are tremendous opportunities in all these areas.
Right.
And I like it also to find these opportunities all around.
Yeah.
And especially going to coastal areas where we find this kind of depressive mood. People are saying our children have left, they're not going into the typical fisheries. As soon as we introduce these ideas of the need for marketing people, for chemists and for all kinds of research, suddenly we find that they're saying our children might actually come back to work on this in our village. So that's basically what we like.
Quite fascinating, because we also look at some of the global trends. One of the big trends that is happening now is around sustainability. Everybody realizes that it's actually not a good thing to waste. It's actually, we waste a lot of food. We waste a lot of resources. In the past, we've never had to think about it, but now the next generation, both of our daughters are similar age, and my daughter constantly reminds me about the environment and how we are wasting food, and we shouldn't be wasting food, and so on and so forth. But you started on this way back. I mean, I remember you talking about the zero waste fish and using the entire utilization of the fish for at least a decade now.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that I'm still meeting people that have never heard of the circular economy, have never heard the term industrial symbiosis. But as soon as they know that there is value in their waste, they start talking. They start to say, okay, let's look at the opportunities. But what I'm amazed with it, that some of them have actually been in industries that haven't changed for 700 years. They've been throwing the same parts for 700 years. Since they started, basically not their family, but so
generationally, because it is handed down. And
so that's the toughest part, which is really to try to open their minds. And I think there is a need for a new generation in the whole marine space, and it's coming in. But sometimes I feel that people are a little bit hesitant, as you're saying. I haven't been in that. It's like a rocket science. It isn't. No. It's very much a mixture of industries, mixture of knowledge that is needed to build a new fish wave.
This is kind of like the new kind of the cross-disciplinary approach that we see in lots of high-tech companies, but it is very relevant even in traditional industries.
Absolutely.
And tell me a little bit about how this concept, the cluster model, has now, you've been kind of working with ecosystems outside of Iceland in a number of cluster setups. Tell us a little bit about some of those examples, and I think it's a very interesting story that you can actually export an idea and get more people to buy into it.
Yeah, I think what we've been learning through our work in the US mainly is that there are similar opportunities. What I love with the idea of expanding the concept is that suddenly we've been in Maine, for instance, in the state of Maine in the US, and there we know they are absolutely the lobster capital of the world.
Right.
But they're still throwing away a lot of waste, what they call waste, but actually realizing there's even more value in the shells themselves than in the meat. So suddenly we've seen a great team there working on these ideas to connect people, academics, industry, etc. They have a similar house as ours now, which is a beautiful design as well. So we are so pleased to see that these models can be duplicated, and especially finding this niche, which is seafood, which is not very much the case in most sort of startup worlds. And I must remind you, I think it was one of our first meetings when I was at Startup Iceland, and I asked people in the audience, raise your hands, those of you that are in marine, into the blue economy. Not one did actually. And this is Iceland.
Right.
So we knew there were opportunities there, and that's what we've seen.
Right. I mean, it's what has been fascinating to me working with founders and startups and all of that is that it's not that you need new ideas, it's just looking at the same thing with a different pair of eyes. And then getting more people who have never been part of that to come and look at that and say, hey, can we do something else with it? And that has been quite fascinating for me to learn and see, and it's fascinating to see that how it has taken off within the seafood industry in Iceland. I mean, number of success stories that have come out of the seafood sector and technology companies that have come out of this working with the seafood industry. I do remember when Controlent started, the first thing that they were thinking about was how to keep the temperature of fish constant. You know? So maybe talk about how Controlent, by the way, Controlent, for those of you who don't know, Controlent is a startup out of Iceland, which is now, I don't know, we probably will meet with the founder for the next episode or something like that. They are used in the COVID vaccine transportation by Pfizer. So it's a very awesome company. So tell me about your first interaction with them and how you kind of played maybe a small role.
Very small role. We played a very small role, but we're pleased that we were actually playing a role.
I mean, this is kind of like the power of the ecosystem, the things that you were talking about, like you know somebody, I know somebody, we make that small introduction and that leads to something big. Of course, we don't do those introductions thinking those things will happen. We just think it's useful for the startup or the founder to meet these people. And I think you paid you've reminded me many times that we undersell the value of things like this. I agree with you. I think those introductions matter way more than we give it credit.
Yeah, I must tell you, one of the first, we had one of the absolute first investor meeting we had was in a small fishing village with CEOs of fisheries, some investors, some banks, and some startups. And these were absolutely unknown startups in Iceland in 2012. These were companies like Controlant, with the CEO there, great presenter, the CEO of a new company called Keresis. And they were there and they were talking about their new ideas with lots of other companies. The main thing is we were then able gladly to assist Controlant with finding a group of investors that are actually in the Ocean Cluster house that wanted to join them, even though the idea was completely different then. But I think probably the best example comes from yourself now with Greenwald and Navis. And it's a great story. The fact is, you asked me whether a guy could be sitting here from this company that was actually working on nanotechnology batteries. They were focused on the automobile industry and others. When we brought them in, I thought, why not make a connection between them and the naval architects? And what happened? They met for a cup of coffee, and since then we're seeing a possible revolutionary technology being used in the marine sector.
And hopefully we'll get the founder of Greenwald on the Futurecast to talk about this particular project. It's very exciting. I mean, they've obviously gone from strength to strength. They've gotten a massive grant from the European Union. They're working on a new generation of batteries. I mean, so I think this is quite obvious, at least in Silicon Valley and those kind of evolved ecosystems that people generously make this introduction.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I've been trying to do in Iceland, which is a lot of people know, others, by the way, access in Iceland is very easy. And introduction doesn't cost anybody anything. You know, if you know somebody and if you think it can help a founder, like as you've been doing, just make that introduction, help them. You never know what comes out of it. So I'm happy that you did.
Yeah.
And I mean, Controlant is a fantastic success story out of Iceland. I hope that they would go from strength to strength and build a massive company. Coming back to our story of kind of like the circular economy, zero waste, food waste, and things of that nature, where do you see this going, at least in the seafood sector? Because you are close to that and you see a lot of things going through this phase, and you're now working with a number of partners in that phase as well. Talk us through that.
I think we will see one of the trends for 21 is definitely more utilization of the fish. And it doesn't come only as something that is sort of politically correct. It needs to be in the industry understood as a value creator.
Yeah.
And that's what's changing a lot now. But with new technology, actually coming from Iceland as well, we're able to separate some of the byproducts. We're talking about half of the fish. So it's the liver is going separately. If you do that, then basically you have a much better product categories. And it means that you can treat the different products much better. So it has to do with high technology, tracing already from the beginning, and being able to keep the these high value products. And once again, these are much more valuable than the fillet.
Right.
That's what's so exciting.
Right. And of course, you know, you need to have science and people who have studied biotechnology to tell you what is valuable, what is not really valuable. So bringing them into an industry which was focused on just catch is kind of like the real alchemy of chemistry. And I think that's showing results, and it's exciting to see that happen in Iceland. So maybe coming to the world of investing and funding, and you know, I do believe that, you know, I was on a podcast with Techstars, which will come out soon, where we were talking about building ecosystems. And the first question is always about capital and money. You know, so how do you harness, you know, funds into initiatives like this when the value is not that clear at the early stage?
No, I think it's basically our biggest challenge. And that's why I like the idea of connecting different clusters, for instance. We find that the investors here in Iceland know all about fishing and about basic fish processing. When you move up the value line, there's suddenly a completely different knowledge that is needed. And even though we have the entrepreneurs working on it, we know that the investors don't only have to bring the capital in, but the know-how and the network itself. So that's why we, for instance, been trying to focus very much on Massachusetts, Boston area, with the biotech sector there, to try to make the connections. So that's how the clusters need to work, because we do not have the capacity here, the knowledge from the investor side to take some of these products all the way.
Right. I mean, today, because we live in this connected world and COVID has made it a lot more easier to get these networks to work as one unit. You know, in the olden days, you would have to probably go meet the people in Boston or something like that. Now, everybody is on Zoom, so or a video conference. So making these connections and making things work digitally is also, in my opinion, going to accelerate a lot of these, you know, introductions that become real projects and funding and things of that nature. What is your opinion on that?
I agree. And I think what I like also is that I felt a little bit that the investors that were talking about sustainability, etc., in maybe 10 years ago, they were more doing it for reasons that were more like politics. So I feel now that there are more serious investors that are into it for the right reason. They're doing it not also mainly for, of course, just sustainability issues, but also because it can be beneficial. So it can go hand in hand. It means that we will find in the coming years, I think, much more sort of from the investment world interest in these fields.
I think you're absolutely right. I just think that, you know, it is no longer a nice to have. This has become a must-have imperative for most businesses to not just think about sustainability after the fact, but how you design and how you make and how you build if you incorporate a lot of these principles in, you see that the end product is much better.
Exactly.
And the customer actually values that more. You can actually showcase that you're actually thinking this way, you're making it this way.
Yeah.
And I think as we talk about, the next generation is going to be extremely picky about these kinds of things, saying that, if you do this right, then I will buy you. Otherwise, I'm not going to buy you. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
At least in the seafood industry, I think traceability, zero waste, all those things is going to become a lot more important feature.
I agree. What I like most probably with my job is that we are meeting with maybe 300 to 400 per year students that are working on all kinds of business projects in school.
Yeah.
I guess half of those are already just focused very much on sustainability and the environmental issues.
Right.
And it means that there is a completely new wave coming of entrepreneurs that will be focused on this area. And it leaves us a little bit, I think, I'm just completely stunned to see how much there is of interest from these new generations.
Yeah, we just need to get the new generation involved. I always tell this to my investor friends: we should just write the checks, so they're not thinking about going and getting a job in Google or Facebook.
No, I agree. Yeah,
we should give them an incentive to actually put their mind to work in these things in Iceland. And
yeah, I think one of the things that I'm the most pleased with, it has to do with things that you were mentioning, is that I have told these students, call all the CEOs in those Icelandic small industries, whatever it is, and ask them if they can help. Tell them that you're an entrepreneur, you're actually in high school, and you want to do certain things, and if they can help you with packaging, with printing or whatever, and I tell them, call me back if someone is rude to you. The fact is, it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
So that's probably the
I
trust
think
level
it
that
has
we
been, at least, I've lived here for 15 years. That's one thing that I've found to be extremely valuable, which is not obvious to everybody outside. The Icelandic business community is actually quite welcoming of people when founders especially, when they reach out and say, hey, can you help? They're always very eager to take the meeting at least. It could be the CEO, it could be the chairman, it could be a board of directors, it doesn't matter. They're actually more willing to meet and talk and understand. And as one of the other things that I've talked about, we have more time in Iceland, so that might be one of the the secrets.
Definitely, I guess that might be right.
So I'm kind of changing gears a little bit and thinking a little bit about the future. So what do you think is, and by the way, I think next year or this year is the 10-year anniversary of the cluster. So what do you think is the next 10 years going to be for the cluster model?
I think we will definitely expand more outside of Iceland. What I find so amazing for us is that we're being contacted by local areas that are actually saying we have difficulties with invasive species. Can we create more value from it? They're even sending batches of this fish over to Iceland, where we use the Icelandic technology, R&D, even marketing, to figure out a way to create more value from the byproducts or from the fillets, etc. By just cutting it right, using artificial intelligence, etc. And the results are amazing. So we will find much more of this in the coming years. And I think Iceland should realize, we ourselves, we don't, I think, that we can play a much larger role in creating this value for developing countries as well as the developed countries. And it would mean a lot. We are wasting so much at this point. We might be talking about 10 to 20 million metric tons of fish that's actually been thrown away. And these are fish, these are meals, these are proteins that might feed a large portion of big regions. Right.
I mean, I'd like to reiterate what you just said. My 10, 15 years in Iceland has been basically trying to expound on this more. I wrote a blog post, I think in 2010 or something like that, and I said, Iceland can build the next Google. A lot of people actually were intrigued when I wrote that. They said, why do you say that? Do you think we have the people here? Do you think we have the know-how here? And I was like, how do you think Google gets built? I think there was a lot of misconception about that. And usually it's small groups of people coming and working on ideas. And if we continue to create a vibrant environment where that happens on a regular basis, new people coming in from outside or inside, or young generation, people who are interested, build an ecosystem that kind of is open-minded towards that, and continue to think about global challenges. And we talked a little bit about that. I think we undersell what we can do from Iceland. I do believe that we can actually do a lot of things that solve some global challenges related to climate change, food waste, how we make things, how we build things. We are resource constrained in terms of people, but we can supplement that with other things and figure out better ways to do things. And I think that is one of the big things, the theme of the Futurecast. I sent you a little bit of a write-up that I had written. I think we can do a lot more. I'm not even saying that we can do something marginally better. I think we can do 100 times better. Think about the GDP of Iceland and say that, multiply that by 100. We could do that. And that only happens if you create value for the globe. It's not going to happen if we just think about how do we solve the problems in Iceland. We just need to think beyond the waters of this country. And I think it's always fun to talk to you about this, because I know we see eye to eye on this. Although, your field is different, but you work with founders. It's basically the founder mentality, which I wanted to bring through this video and podcast. Once again, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. And by the way, if you want to learn anything about seafood or fish, or the zero waste fish or circular economy, we're always available. You can always reach out to us. More than happy to meet you in the cluster.
Thank you.
We have good coffee.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And good food, which is always important. Thank you, Thor.
Thank you.
Yeah.